Of course, after the vote yesterday, the prospect of another referendum is still on the cards. MPs could agree to one next week in return for backing the Prime Minister's deal. But would anything change? Have many people actually changed their minds? Andrew Sinclair has been speaking to some people who have switched sides.
It was one of the largest electoral expressions of public opinion that we've ever seen. 76% of people across the East voted in a referendum which had the simple question: do you want to remain in or leave the European Union?
Well, that was a really easy decision at the time. Can you imagine what would happen if you had to unpick 40 years worth of legislation? The cost of the economy would have just been outrageous, and it would just interfere with everybody's daily lives.
My main concern was trying to keep 28 countries happy. I like devolved government, like Scotland, where they can focus on more local problems, and that's my preference. And I just felt the EU was too much of a balancing act between 28 countries.
Karen Mitchell and Sandy Gilchrist were both clear at the time why they voted the way they did, but both have since changed their minds. Mr Gilchrist, a data protection consultant from Norwich, now wants to leave because he says that's what people voted for and Parliament has dragged its feet.
First and foremost, I believe in democracy. More than 60% of constituencies voted to leave, and yet 75% of MPs suggested beforehand that they were Remainers. And it's like, well, hang on a second, that seems really unfair. What I really want to do now is get it through and get it right.
So you've changed your mind. How do you feel about the idea of another referendum?
I would absolutely mind another referendum because I believe in democracy. The point about democracy is, so if I don't like the result I got last time, you don't just go around sort of say, well, let's try again, shall we?
Karen Mitchell from Great Yarmouth stayed a Leave supporter for a while after the referendum, but changed her mind in 2017.
It was when they triggered Article 50 and there was no deal, outline of a deal, no plan or anything in place at the time, and I sort of started to get concerned then that what we'd been told before wasn't going to happen because there didn't seem to be any idea, any plan or any outline of what was next.
But the ultimate direction of travel is that we will be leaving the EU and we will become an independent nation, which is what you voted for in the first place.
Yes, but unfortunately I've changed my mind. I certainly didn't vote to leave without a deal. I like the freedom of movement. I like that customs is easy and things like that.
How many others have changed their minds? Those who want us to stay in the EU claim that a lot of Leave voters have switched. This pro-Remain group, which was campaigning at the party conferences, claims to have more than 2,000 members who've changed sides. When you consider that 17.4 million voted to leave, that's not very many people changing their mind, is it?
No, it isn't. But I like to think that for every person who have had the confidence and the bravery to step forward and say, I voted this way, I have changed my mind, there is hundreds, perhaps, of people who haven't yet.
But the government and many Leave supporters claim that opinion is moving their way, with many Remain voters keen to bring the uncertainty to an end. Sandy Gilchrist feels so strongly about the issue, he's got involved in politics for the first time and is now a candidate for the Brexit Party. Karen Mitchell is still hoping for another referendum. Both of them know other people who've changed their minds, but are the numbers large enough to make any difference?
Well, earlier this week I spoke to Sir John Curtis, the Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University.
The truth is that the vast bulk of people who voted in the 2016 referendum say they would do exactly the same thing again. On average, the polls suggest that somewhere between 85 and 90% of those who voted either Remain or Leave say they would do exactly the same thing. There's only a relatively small group of people, 8-9% or so, who say, oh, I voted Remain last time, but I'll vote Leave this time, or vice versa.
So those people who want us to have another referendum, what would this tell us about the prospect of that and how it would go?
Well, there is, of course, a third group that's potentially important in any second referendum, and that is those people who did not vote 3 years ago. And it is amongst that group that, in truth, the hopes of those on the Remain side, who are for the most part the ones who are advocating another referendum, that's where they seem to lie. Because amongst those who did not vote 3 years ago, some of course were too young, but that's by no means the bulk of them, the polls suggest now there's at least something like a 2-to-1 majority in favour of Remain. And it is that support for remaining amongst those who didn't express a view in 2016 that's primarily responsible for the fact that on average, and indeed most polls are very close to the average, the polls suggest that at the moment it's about Remain 53, Leave 47, but inevitably very, very close.
Of course, the Prime Minister says he wants a general election. So what does all of that tell us about what would happen at a general election?
When it comes to a general election, of course, there are two choices that Leavers have. It's Conservative or the Brexit Party. There are two choices that Remain voters have. It's Labour or the Liberal Democrats. And at the moment, at least, the Leave vote is much more clearly consolidated behind the Conservative Party than the Remain vote is behind either Labour or the Democrats. That latter vote is split. And it is that difference, it's the relative consolidation of the Leave vote politically behind the Conservative Party that gives Boris Johnson the prospect, at least, of winning an overall majority, and why, for those on the Leave side, a general election looks like a relatively attractive prospect as compared with a referendum. And in the end, we should bear in mind that this argument about consulting the people is not really an argument about whether the people should be consulted. It's an argument about how they should be consulted. And people's views on that tend to reflect the realpolitik that a referendum looks like something that's more favourable to Remain, whereas an election perhaps is something that the Leave side can look forward with a degree of enthusiasm.
So John, thank you very much.
You're welcome.